The Indus River, a lifeline for millions, snakes its way through the heart of South Asia. Its waters have nurtured civilizations for millennia. But today, this vital resource is a source of tension, a potential flashpoint in the volatile relationship between India and Pakistan. At the heart of this issue lies the Indus Waters Treaty, a 1960 agreement that divided the 6 rivers of the Indus Basin between the two nations. India gained control over the eastern rivers, the Ravi, Beas, and Sutlej. Pakistan, in turn, received the western rivers, the Indus, Jhelum, and Chenab. This treaty, brokered by the World Bank, was hailed as a triumph of diplomacy. It offered a framework for cooperation over a shared resource, a beacon of hope in a region scarred by partition and conflict. For decades the treaty largely held, surviving wars and diplomatic standoffs. But the agreement, once seen as a model for transboundary water sharing, is now under immense strain. The treaty's fragility reflects the deep-rooted mistrust and historical baggage that continues to plague India-Pakistan relations. Water, a vital resource for both nations, has become increasingly entangled in this complex geopolitical web. As both countries face growing water scarcity, the Indus Waters Treaty stands as a critical test, a litmus test for whether cooperation or conflict will define the future of South Asia. For Pakistan, the Indus River is not just a source of water, it is a matter of national survival. The country is heavily reliant on the Indus for its agricultural production, which forms the backbone of its economy. Over 90% of Pakistan's freshwater supply originates from the Indus Basin. This precious water irrigates vast swaths of farmland, sustaining millions of livelihoods and ensuring food security for a rapidly growing population. The statistics paint a stark picture. Agriculture accounts for nearly a quarter of Pakistan's GDP and employs over a third of its workforce. Any significant disruption to the flow of the Indus would have catastrophic consequences. A 20% reduction in water availability could cripple Pakistan's economy, pushing millions into poverty and triggering a humanitarian crisis of unimaginable proportions. Pakistan is already grappling with the effects of climate change, with erratic rainfall patterns and frequent droughts. The country's existing water infrastructure is inadequate and plagued by inefficiencies. In this context, any move by India to restrict water flow would be viewed not just as an unfriendly act, but as an existential threat. India, for its part, argues that the Indus Waters Treaty is outdated and unfairly favors Pakistan. It claims that the treaty grants Pakistan an undue share of the Indus Basin's water resources, leaving India with access to only a small fraction of the total flow. This argument, however, overlooks the treaty's historical context and the significant compromises made by India during its negotiation. India has recently intensified its rhetoric, threatening to suspend the treaty and demanding its modification. It cites a range of concerns, from security threats emanating from Pakistan to the need for increased hydropower generation to meet its growing energy demands. India's actions, however, have raised alarm bells in Pakistan and among international legal experts. Critics argue that India's stance is driven more by political considerations than by genuine water scarcity concerns. They point to India's ambitious river-linking projects and its growing water storage capacity as evidence that it is not facing an imminent water crisis. India's aggressive posture, they warn, risks setting a dangerous precedent for transboundary water disputes worldwide. India's threats to unilaterally abrogate or modify the Indus Waters Treaty have serious legal implications. International law, including the 1997 UN Watercourses Convention, and customary international law, clearly prohibits countries from unilaterally altering the flow of transboundary rivers. The Indus Waters Treaty itself contains no provision for unilateral withdrawal or modification. Legal experts argue that India's actions violate the fundamental principles of international law and set a dangerous precedent for other transboundary water disputes. They warn that such unilateral actions could trigger a domino effect, leading to water conflicts in other parts of the world where similar treaties exist. The international community has a vested interest in upholding the sanctity of international law and ensuring that transboundary water resources are managed cooperatively, not through coercion or conflict. Pakistan has vowed to challenge any violation of the treaty at international legal forums, including the International Court of Justice. The legal battle, however, could be protracted and uncertain, adding another layer of complexity to an already volatile situation. The escalating water dispute between India and Pakistan carries the dangerous potential for conflict. Pakistan, already facing water scarcity and heavily reliant on the Indus, views any attempt by India to restrict water flow as an act of aggression, even an act of war. This sentiment is deeply ingrained in the Pakistani psyche and reflected in its national security doctrine. In the event of a water cutoff, Pakistan has a range of retaliatory options at its disposal, none of them desirable. Military strikes against Indian dams or hydropower projects on the western rivers, while risky and potentially escalatory, cannot be ruled out. Pakistan could also resort to economic warfare, blocking trade routes or suspending access to the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, a flagship project of China's Belt and Road Initiative. The potential for conflict extends beyond direct military confrontation. A water crisis in Pakistan could trigger mass displacement, social unrest, and a surge in extremism, further destabilizing the region and providing fertile ground for terrorist groups to operate. The international community must recognize the gravity of the situation and work actively to prevent a water war in South Asia. Section 6. A region on edge. Wider implications. The Indus water dispute has far-reaching implications that extend beyond the immediate region. South Asia is home to a quarter of the world's population and some of its fastest-growing economies. A conflict between India and Pakistan, two nuclear-armed states, would have devastating humanitarian, economic, and geopolitical consequences. The international community cannot afford to be bystanders in this unfolding crisis. The United States, China, and other major powers have a responsibility to engage with both India and Pakistan, urging them to resolve their differences through dialogue and diplomacy. The World Bank, as the original broker of the Indus Waters Treaty, also has a crucial role to play in facilitating a peaceful resolution. The Indus water dispute is a stark reminder of the interconnectedness of our world and the transboundary nature of many of the challenges we face. It underscores the urgent need for international cooperation and the rule of law in managing shared resources, particularly in an era of increasing water scarcity and climate change. The Indus water dispute is further complicated by the looming threat of climate change. The Himalayan glaciers which feed the Indus River system are melting at an alarming rate due to rising global temperatures. This melting is leading to erratic water flows, with increased flooding in the short term and reduced water availability in the long term. Climate change is acting as a threat multiplier, exacerbating existing tensions over water resources and increasing the likelihood of conflict. Both India and Pakistan are highly vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, facing more frequent and intense droughts, floods, and heat waves. Addressing climate change is not just an environmental imperative, it is also a security imperative. The international community must work together to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and help vulnerable countries adapt to the impacts of climate change. Failure to do so will only increase the risk of conflict over scarce resources, including water. Section 8. Towards a solution. Dialogue and diplomacy. The only viable path to resolving the Indus water dispute lies in dialogue and diplomacy. Both India and Pakistan must recognize that a water war would be catastrophic for both nations and the wider region. They must return to the negotiating table and engage in good faith efforts to find a mutually acceptable solution. One potential avenue for progress is to strengthen the role of the Permanent Indus Commission, a bilateral body established under the Indus Waters Treaty to address technical issues and disputes. The Commission's mandate could be expanded to include discussions on water sharing, climate change adaptation, and joint infrastructure projects. Another important step would be to involve neutral third parties, such as the World Bank or the United Nations, to facilitate dialogue and mediate disputes. These institutions can provide technical expertise, financial assistance, and a neutral platform for negotiations. Section 9. The future of the Indus cooperation or catastrophe. The Indus River, once a symbol of shared heritage and cooperation, is now at a crossroads. The choices made by India and Pakistan in the coming months and years will determine whether the Indus becomes a source of conflict or a catalyst for cooperation. The stakes could not be higher. The future of South Asia, a region already grappling with poverty, inequality, and political instability, hangs in the balance. The international community must use all its diplomatic weight to avert a water war and guide India and Pakistan towards a path of peace and cooperation. The Indus River, a lifeline for millions, should not become a river of despair. It is time for visionary leadership, bold diplomacy, and a shared commitment to peace and sustainability. The future of the Indus, and the millions who depend on it, rests on the choices we make today.